In your thought leadership, think about creating your body of work by noticing not only what is missing, but who is missing. Enjoy my conversation with Katrine Marc on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. Today, we are talking about what it looks like to create your body of work, and specifically by noticing not only what is missing, but who is missing. I'm excited to have on the podcast today Katrine Marc, who's a best-selling author on women and innovation. Her first book was called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner and has been translated into more than 20 languages. It was also named as one of the Guardian's Books of the Year in 2015. Katrine's second book, which comes out the day this episode airs, October 19th, 2021, comes out in the United States that day, is called Mother of Invention: How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men. Katrine is a journalist by trade and specifically has a background and degrees in economics, which is the focus of her body of work. So I've been following Katrine for a while. She's also been a listener of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. So we had connected a couple of years ago, and I really wanted to bring her on to talk about not only the topics that she covers in her books about how economics and innovation have neglected women, have ignored women, and the consequences not only for us as women, but really for a society as a whole. And we talk about specific examples in our conversation about that. But then also Katrine and I, towards the end, discuss how she is speaking her brand with her writings and with the speaking engagements that she does, as well as how she's growing her audience specifically to get more people to purchase her book and to get paid speaking engagement. And so as you listen to our conversation, think about, for your own area of expertise, your own topics around your thought leadership, and when you're creating your body of work, where are you noticing what is missing? Or in this case, for Katrine and her body of work, by noticing who is missing. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the podcast, Katrine.
Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. You have written a couple of books, and the first one is called Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner? And we can talk a little bit about the premise of that book. And then you have a brand new book coming out here in the United States the day that this episode airs, October 19th, called Mother of Invention. And the subtitle is How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men. So I am so excited to dig into this with you, Katrine. I've been following you and your work and your books and your newsletter for a while. And so I just love what you write about as far as how the absence of women in our society, ideas getting ignored, women not being represented in all these different fields really not only cost us as women, but really cost society as a whole. So Katrine, before we dig into your body of work, can you tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you do? And then we'll kind of talk about how you got into the work that you're doing.
Yes. Okay. So firstly, I'm a loyal listener to the Speaking Your Brand podcast because I guess I'm one of these authors who feel very comfortable writing, comes very natural to me. It's my favorite thing to do, who, after a few years realized that if you want to be a successful nonfiction author, you also have to learn to, well, maybe not speak your brand, but at least speak your books. And your podcast has really been, honestly, one of the things that has really helped me gain that confidence. So I want to say thank you to you.
Oh, well, I'm so glad to hear that.
But anyway, so I'm Swedish, but I live in the UK in a village outside of London since about 10 years. I'm a financial journalist. I guess I specialize in writing about women and economics and this latest book, which is about women and innovation. And I'm also somebody who is passionate about writing about economics in an accessible way, because I think it's so important that that whole conversation, that more people want to join that conversation and contribute to that conversation. And many people are unfortunately scared off by sort of the way we talk in economics often.
Katrine, as you well know, economics as a field tends to be dominated by men. If we, here in the United States, we think of the Federal Reserve, and there has been maybe one woman who's been Janet Yellen, head of the Federal Reserve, but all the rest have been men. You think of the economics profession, all of the most well-known figures are men. So what got you interested in the field of economics? And I know that you were born and raised in Sweden. Was it because of the environment there is different than, say, here in the States or in England?
I don't think so, really. So I know obviously Sweden is famous for gender equality, and Sweden certainly does do certain things that countries like the US or the UK, where I live now, don't do, like invest 4% of GDP into affordable childcare and maternity and paternity leave and these sort of things. And there's the famous story of the American tourist going around the capital of Sweden an afternoon and then going, "What's up with all the gay nannies?" Because there's so many men pushing buggies around Stockholm. So all of that is great and, great country to grow up in. But that doesn't mean that, Sweden is some kind of feminist paradise. And actually, when I studied economics, even in Sweden, we had lecturers, or one lecturer saying that, men understand these concepts quicker than women and stuff like that. So that was still around. And I am not that old, I'm 38. So I think there is something particular about that subject that seems to, I don't know why there's so much sexism within economics, but there certainly is. I guess I was attracted to it because I've always been interested in sort of the big forces that shape the world, and that's certainly one of them.
Absolutely. I think that's what drew me to history, was the same reason. What are these big forces and the players within them that have formed the world that we live in today?
Yeah, absolutely.
Katrine, let us talk a little bit about your first book, Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner. Tell us the premise of that book, and also give us a primer on who Adam Smith was and the role that he played in really the economics that we live in even up to this day, because that was hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, let's do some economic history. So Adam Smith is credited to have, as the founding father of economics. And so he, in 1776, he wrote this very famous book called The Wealth of Nations. He was up in Scotland, by the way. And he was a philosopher, mainly. Economists didn't exist, obviously, back then. But he wrote this book, The Wealth of Nations, trying to explore, really what keeps the economy together. Because it is quite mysterious, isn't it, that we sort of, we go out, we go to the store, or, we buy something, we sell something, and it all seems to, most of the time, really work. And he was interested in what is it that keeps the economy going? Why do people do what they do in the economy? And there's this really, really famous quote from The Wealth of Nations where he says, "It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that you get your dinner. It's from them serving their own self-interest." So his point is that, we all go to work every day and produce the things we produce, not because we love it or because we like bread or whatever we make, but, to turn a profit, to make money out of self-interest. And economists that came after Adam Smith, they made a massive deal out of this. And, this idea that self-interest is the fundamental force in the economy. Economics has even been called, the science of self-interest. And so that's where my book starts. But it starts by asking an even more fundamental question, is that, okay, if the founding question of economics is how do you get your dinner, which Adam Smith was thinking about, then who actually cooked Adam Smith's dinner? And the founding father of economics, he lived most of his life with his mother, who looked after the household for him. So was she like the butcher and the brewer in his famous quote? Did she do this out of self-interest? Well, partly, maybe, but there were not that many other options for widows in Scotland in those days. But partly she probably also did it because she loved him, she cared for him, she wanted to, it was meaningful. Basically, all of the other reasons why we do what we do in the economy or in life that are not self-interest. But the problem was that because Adam Smith never thought about his mum in that sense, women got excluded from economics, because work became defined as what you do in the market in order to get money or produce things. So the work that women are expected to do and are still expected to do, the work within the home and the household, care work, looking after the children, the elderly, cooking the dinner, that was defined as, not work, not as something that's counted in GDP, not counted as something that contributes to a country's wealth or growth. And that's a big problem, I argue, in the book.
Well, absolutely, because it impacts, I imagine, the gender pay gap that we experience even to this day. And as well as, again, women not being represented in a lot of fields. And then though the fields that women tend to be overrepresented in, like teaching and nursing, tend to have lower pay than comparable fields where men tend to dominate.
Yes, exactly. And that also has to do with, the fact that care work was not counted. And then when a lot of that care work went from being done within the household to being done on the market, the economic logic would also, well, women used to do this for free before. Why should we pay them very much now? So a lot of the sort of devaluation of, traditional women's work or the work that women have been expected to perform comes from this. And it needs to be corrected within economics, is what I argue in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk now about your new book that's come out, Mother Invention, How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men. And like I mentioned, you have this fantastic newsletter on Substack. I'm going to make sure to include a link to that in the show notes so that our listeners can go and subscribe to it, because you send out kind of snippets, I assume, related to ideas that you talk about in your book, and then also things that are going on in the news. And I remember one from, this was probably earlier this year, where you talked about the microphone packs that as speakers we wear, when we're going to give a presentation somewhere in person, we're on a stage or even in TV studios. And I've, worn these hundreds of times, and they're big, they're, unwieldy, they're very hard to attach. Now for men, it's very easy because most of the time men are wearing pants. You just put them on your pants and you're fine. As women, if we're wearing pants, it may work, but a lot of times I'm not wearing pants. So we have to find a way to attach the microphone pack to our bra strap or to the back of our dress. And oftentimes it's a male technician who's there, who's assisting us with attaching it. And so in your newsletter, you question, well, why isn't there better technology by this day and age? We have these smartphones that are slim and lightweight. Why can't we do the same thing for microphone packs? So Katrine, how did this idea first come to you to even think about, the difference between men and women wearing these? And then tell us a little bit more about what you discovered.
Well, the idea obviously came to me all of the times I've been sort of backstage with like two strange men sort of trying to attach a microphone pack to my bra, trying to not feel uncomfortable by this. And, or the other time, when the worst ones are those things they put up your leg. Do you know what I mean? Like a sort of Lara Croft sort of thing. And they put the microphone pack there and you're supposed to have that under your skirt. The solutions are just so bad. So it clearly is one of these examples of design that's not done for women, and how, women speaking up and speaking in public, it is still controversial, isn't it? Right. And clearly the technology for women to feel comfortable in these situations. And I think, it was a while since I wrote that newsletter, but I think I also bring up, women in public positions and in speaking who wear traditional clothing, right? Non-Western clothing. It's very, very difficult for them. Where do you put the mic on them? So it's one example of innovation not being done with women in mind. And, why isn't it?
Well, that's a great question. And then I imagine that if a woman did imagine a better technology, would she be able to get the funding?
Yes. So that's the other thing, which is that men virtually have a monopoly on venture capital funding in our economies. It's actually an area where the US is doing better than Sweden. I think in Sweden is only 1% of all venture capital funding that goes to women. I think in the US it's 2 to 3 or something like that.
So much more.
Yeah, but still it matters. And obviously we should say that, the huge majority of that funding goes to white women. So if you're a woman of color, it's even harder. Here in the UK, I think 0.2% goes to women of color. So, Which is a huge problem, because if you really think about it, the people that get funding for their innovations today, those are the peoples that are developing the technology of the future, the artificial intelligence of the future, the business models of the future, and women are just not there. And that's one of the themes I look into in the book Mother of Invention. Why isn't venture capital able to fund women's ideas better?
Well, it reminds me, Katrine, I read an article, this was several years ago now, about the women who founded Rent the Runway and Stitch Fix. So now two very popular businesses, that have, I think maybe one of them has IPO'd by now, but they talked about in their early days not being able to get investment funding because they would go to men, because again, men held the purse strings for all of this money. And then they would pitch to the men, and the men would be like, I don't get it. Like, why would women want a stylist to send them clothes, via the mail? And it's like, wow, like it's like a lack of imagination on their part.
And it's particularly weird in the way, because women are so powerful as consumers. Women are thought to influence 80% of all consumer decisions in the economy. So, it's just money left on the table, by not funding these ideas. And it is really a mystery. Well, it's not a mystery because I explained why in the book, but yes. It was a mystery to me until I wrote the book.
So then and the kind of like the preview of your book on Amazon, I'll include a link in the show notes to your book on Amazon so people can grab it there. And it says here, it all starts with a rolling suitcase. So the wheel was invented some 5,000 years ago, and the suitcase in the 19th century. It wasn't until the 1970s that someone successfully married the two. What was the holdup? Because real men carried their bags no matter how heavy. So why in the world would they need wheels on their suitcases?
Yes. One of the classic mysteries of innovation that economists often talk about, Nobel Prize winning economists have tried to figure this out. Why didn't we get wheels on suitcases until 1972? And really, the product didn't go mainstream until the late 1980s. This is so stupid. We managed to put two men on the moon before that. And it's really been this almost cautionary tale of innovation, that we think we're so clever, we're so great at inventing all these things, and we overlook these simple solutions. But what I found, and that's why I start the book there, is that actually the whole thing had to do with gender. There were actually rolling suitcases before 1972, but they were all sort of niche products for women, because this idea was so strong that no man would ever roll a suitcase. And obviously, if something was a niche product for women, it wasn't really taken seriously or getting funding or being scaled. And even when the product the wheeled suitcase was officially invented in the 1970s, at first, no American department store wanted to sell it, because they thought men will never, ever roll a suitcase. That's just ridiculous. And women are too small of a market. If a woman travels, she travels with a man, obviously, and he will need to carry her bag for her in order to prove that he's a real man. So no, we can't see the potential of this product. And obviously they were wrong, because then gender roles changed and the labor market changed. Women started going on business trips to a much larger extent. And hey, now we're all rolling our suitcases, but we've forgotten the history, which is that there were, again, ideas of gender, sort of about gender holding innovation back.
Katrine, so I know that there's so many examples that we can talk about from your newsletter and from your book. And I, again, encourage listeners to go get your book to read these. So before we transition into talking a bit about how you are speaking your brand through your writing and your speaking, I would love to know if there's a hopeful, optimistic note that you can leave us on, maybe from your book, as far as how do things get better? What do we do? Like, what can we do as individuals? But I know obviously this is societal, systemic issues, but what are some things that can help?
I mean, so the book basically tries to, in my little way and hopefully funny way, do a reasonable job rewriting the history of innovation to include women back into it. Because I think there's still this idea that, everything great and big ever has been invented by men. I think a lot of people have that. So I try to sort of include women back in, for example, we talk about the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and the Stone Age, which are sort of technologies associated with men. Why don't we talk about the string age? So string was something that women invented. Why don't we talk about the ceramics age? That's a technology invented by women. Why don't we talk about the flax age, technology from soft materials? The book really tries to do that and makes you sort of hopefully think about innovation and technology and who is an inventor differently. And I think that is something that we all, can try to do in our own way. And I do think, a lot of people, I should be honest, have read the book and said that it was really, really depressing, which was not what I intended at all. But, because they just felt that, you just show how deep these things go and, it goes all this way back in history and it's so unfair. And I really meant for the book to be quite hopeful. And I think it is. It is hopefully funny anyway. Because I think there is something hopeful, because it says that, look, we've only been innovating with one hand. The other one has been sort of tied behind our back. So what if we sort of release this other hand and just use all the amazing potential for innovation that exists in men and women and minorities and people who have been excluded from these things? Look what amazing things we could achieve. And that's why I think it's a hopeful book. But clearly, my readers don't always agree.
Okay, well, thank you for the warning on that. I know, I'm sure it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's pre-ordered, and I know it's going to show up on my Kindle first day when it comes out on October 19th. Okay, so let us now transition into talking about how you're speaking your brand with your writings, whether it's your newsletter and your books, and then speaking engagement. So you mentioned early on that as a writer, obviously that's your medium of choice. You love to write, but you recognize that speaking is an important part of what you do as a nonfiction author. So Katrine, let's talk about the pre-COVID world, like when you actually had in-person speaking engagements and then probably returning in 2022 to in-person. Tell us a bit about what types of speaking engagements do you do? Who hires you? What types of organizations and companies? And then what do they want you to talk about when you come speak to them?
A lot of different things, really. So, it could be anything from municipality in northern Sweden to, women's business conference in Belgium to, companies. I didn't do that much speaking, around my first book, Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner. So that book did really well in the sense that it got translated into so many languages. And it really kind of catapulted me a little bit from somebody who was just in Sweden doing my Swedish thing, being Swedish, into somebody who had a book out in many languages. And so it changed a lot for me in that way. But it took me quite a long time, to be honest, Carol, to really go out and do speaking in the way that I saw other authors do. When I wrote this book, Mother Invention, I already had in the back of my mind that I needed to be able to speak about this book in an effective way, even for it in order to sell. So, as an author, you speak to sell your book, and also then, hopefully you sell speaking engagements that you make money from too. So I did started to think at quite an early stage about, just, somewhere at the back of my head, how can this be turned into something that I can talk about as well? And that's been quite important. And so now with this book, I've been doing a lot more. But then obviously COVID hit and we all transitioned to digital, which in a way I liked because I used to work in television and it's similar-ish. But now I'm sick and tired of it because it's too.
So do you have any in-person speaking engagements on the calendar?
I do, actually. It's quite exciting. I have one on Monday.
Oh, good. In London?
In London, yes. But I found it was weird. I saw that you've done your first in-person one as well. It's strange. I did one, just a small one the other week. And I just realized, I don't know where to look anymore. Because you're so used to just staring at that camera. And suddenly I had a room of people and I started panicking, who am I looking at? Where am I looking?
Oh, that's such a great point, Katrine. And I will say that, I loved being back in person, and I had, a number of my mom was there, my sister, Diane was there, some clients were there. So it was great to see them in person. And then obviously with the 80 plus other women who were there in the audience. But then after I was done and got home, I was exhausted. And I think it's because I'm not used to that much stimulation, being out and about with people at an in-person event. So I feel like almost like my muscles have atrophied. I have to build them back up.
Yeah. No, it was very exciting and weird. And, but it's just, as an author also, I mean, I did like a whole book launch here in the UK without any physical events. And it just becomes, you just feel like you're talking to the same audience all the time, even though you don't, because you don't get the same, am I talking to, women engineers, or am I, it's just all kind of blurs into one, and that's not very much fun. So I look forward to actually getting out in the physical world.
Katrine, I just have like these visuals in my mind for you for in-person keynotes where you could really like have fun with it with some props, like have the suitcase and like the non-real suitcase and the wheel suitcase and like these like the microphone packs, because it's so much fun to use props. It gives the audience kind of something else to look at and to laugh about. So I'm just like coming up with these ideas in my mind.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. I've never dared to use props. I guess I'm one of these people who, I never saw myself as a natural speaker. Like it took quite a lot of like work for me to get out there and be comfortable. And it's weird because I used to do television. I was absolutely fine with that, but speaking was just harder. I don't know why.
Maybe because it's just there's people that that are there in the audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's like you're speaking your book, it's quite personal. And also I think as an author, it's because sort of your book, all the details, and it's this incredibly complex thing to you. And when you're turning that into a keynote, you do have to simplify it. And I think as an author, there's a lot of, resistance to that. I have 50 pages of footnotes. I would love to be able to like be on a stage and read out the footnotes, but I realize
that is so. I've worked with clients who have had books as well, and then they come to do their signature talk, and it's the same thing because they have a 250-page book that has fantastic material in it, but obviously we can't use it all for a 45-minute talk, so we have to pick the high level and then like the most like impactful anecdotes or examples from there.
And I think, if there are other authors listening to this, that can be like literally a painful process, but it needs to be done. And I think for me, a big step was just to realize that needs to be done. It's a different medium. It's very different. And I'm still learning, and I'm actually starting to enjoying it a bit. Like the first year, it was just terror and dread. And now I do actually like it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It does get easier the more you do it, just like with anything else in life. Katrine, how are you growing your audience? So your business model, so to speak, you want to grow your audience so that they purchase your books, I imagine. And then obviously and hire you, then event organizers, companies, et cetera, hire you to speak. Do you have any other revenue streams that you focus on?
No, it's mainly books. So I've been lucky in the way that, that I have quite a lot of, foreign translations of my work. So that becomes income. And that's, I think it's something that many authors don't think about enough, really. And even agents don't think about enough, that there are a lot of languages out there in the world. And that can actually become quite a good business out of that, because you don't need like huge book deals if you're having a lot of them in many countries. And also it's an incredible honor and great thing to just, your book is out in Korean and Japanese and Romanian. So it's quite exciting. So yeah, books and talks to sell the book. And then I have started this newsletter, which is, trying to sort of help grow my audience. And also it's a lot of fun to write a weekly thing like that.
And what do you do for visibility to get in front of more people?
When you're launching a book, obviously you have help from your publisher and a publicist that tries to get you on everything. And they're quite good at that. I probably haven't done enough sort of strategic things. Speaking engagements, certainly. And I, also experienced this, that, you go do a speaking engagement and then, 2 or 3 people there contact you afterwards and, want to maybe do something. So that certainly builds my audience. And I've had really good experiences with my newsletter as well. that has been very helpful.
Fantastic, Katrine. And so I am such a fan. I just want to say thank you so much for doing the work that you do. It is so important, and I'm so glad that you're doing it. Where's the best place for listeners to connect with you?
Yes. So my website is katrinemarcel.com, Katrine with an E, Marcel with a C. Very complicated, and not that complicated, but I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. And there you can find most things about me. And mainly you can subscribe to my newsletter, which comes out every Friday. And I'm having a lot of fun writing. And obviously, my book, which will be out.
Fantastic. Well, again, all those links will be in the show notes, which listeners can find at speakingyourbrand.com/247. So the episode number, speakingyourbrand.com/247. Katrine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've so enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again to Katrine for coming on the podcast. Be sure to buy her new book, Mother of Invention. Let's give her some support there. There is a link in the show notes where you can go to Amazon to purchase it, of course, or find it at your favorite bookseller. In the past few episodes before this one, we did a series around in-person speaking, and Katrine and I touched on that a little bit as in-person speaking is returning, as more events and conferences are coming back in person. So go back into your podcast app and you can see the past 3 episodes related to that if you'd like to dig in more as far as how to prepare as we return to in-person speaking. And then coming up, we have some more episodes that I'm going to be talking about the relationship between speaking and performance. And then also our 250th podcast episode is coming up in just a few weeks. And in that episode, I'm going to talk about the medium is the message. So make sure to hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so you don't miss our future episodes. Also, share this podcast episode with a friend or a colleague who you think would enjoy it. Until next time, thanks for listening.